Good, that's great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Charles Shapiro, the President of World Affairs Council of Atlanta. Our program today is All Eyes on Germany, and our guest is Constanze Stelzenmüller. This program is part of the World Affairs Councils of America series, Germany's Elections and the Future of Transatlantic Relations, held under the auspices of Wunderbar Together 2021, and in partnership with the American Council on Germany and the Atlantic Brücke. In addition, I'd like to thank the Halle Foundation based here in Atlanta for additional support. I'm going to give a shout out to our partners, Bill Clifford, CEO of the World Affairs Councils of America, our umbrella organization, and Dr. Stephen Sokol, CEO of the American Council on Germany, and Marshall Sanders, Executive Director of the Halle Foundation. I want to welcome our board members, Joe Bankoff and Sam Owens, and Melanie Moltmann, the newly arrived Consul General of Germany in the Southeastern United States. I think Melanie's been here 6 weeks. Dr. Rajiv Darwan, Director of the Economic Forecasting Unit at the Robinson College of Business at Georgia State University, and former Ambassador to the Organization of American States, Hattie Babbitt, and former U.S. Ambassador to Honduras, Lisa Kubisky. At about 12:30, we'll take questions from the audience. Please do not use chat. Actually, I think chat is disabled. Submit your questions using the Q&A function on the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And please do me a favor by keeping your questions short. That would be terrific for me. Constanze Stelzenmüller is the inaugural holder of the Fritz Stern Chair on Germany and Transatlantic Relations at the Center on the United States and Europe at Brookings. She's had fabulous positions in the past, the Kissinger Chair on Foreign Policy and International Relations at the Library of Congress, a Senior Transatlantic Fellow with the German Marshall Fund of the US. She's the former director of the German Marshall Fund's Berlin office, and for 10 years, Constanze was an editor of the German weekly magazine Die Zeit. Constanze, welcome. It's a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This has been cooking a while. And can I just say, I would much rather be there with you in person. And it's really regrettable. Washington is a southern city, but it sure ain't Atlanta. So no, well, I hope I get another chance.
We're going to hopefully bring you here in the spring. We'd love to have you.
I'd be thrilled. Maybe by then we'll have a government.
Yeah, exactly. So we're here to talk about elections. So let's talk about elections. First of all, everybody's seen the results and the number of seats that each party's gotten. Who are the biggest winners and who are the biggest losers?
Yeah, this was a truly historic election and exciting even for me, who as an expat living in Washington, D.C., has been watching this from afar and subject to the travel ban. So I wasn't able to travel and take a look at things myself. In fact, I didn't even get my ballot because, I don't know, some post office on the way screwed up. Yep, whatever happens ain't my fault because I didn't get to vote, which I have not voted ever in my life, which is really quite difficult, I find. But that said, I watched it with interest, tension, nervousness, I think like all of my fellow citizens. And there are bits about the outcome that are unsurprising and some that are very surprising. So the unsurprising part, I guess, is that, voters did not vote for extremist parties on the left or on the right much. We might come to that afterwards. They sort of bunched together in the middle, which is what Germans tend to do when they think things might get a little more exciting. The two enormous surprises to me is that after a really whiplash election campaign with an unprecedented 3 Chancellor candidates, and for the first time in history, for the first time since the 1950s, we once in the very early days of West Germany had a 3-way coalition, but that's buried in the mists of the past. So literally for the first time in modern political history, and all of these candidates were on top for a while. First, the Green candidate, Annalena Baerbock, then the Christian Democratic center-right candidate, Armin Laschet, who wanted to be Angela Merkel's successor as a member of her own party, And then finally, the Social Democrats came out on top at 25.7% of the vote. The reason why this is so interesting is, and so surprising, is that for months, over a year, the Social Democrats had been in the 14-15% doldrums. And this was read as part of a Europe-wide demise of center-left parties. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be interesting to explore why that happened in a moment. I think it's not just the fact that their candidate, Olaf Scholz, who's also Angela Merkel's finance minister, was able to cast himself not just as the running incumbent. Remember, this was the first German election where the incumbent wasn't running, but he sort of managed to cast himself in her mold with a really very good, well-run campaign in which, unlike the other candidates, he didn't make any errors. But again, I think there's a larger political trend there that we could explore. The other really big surprise that I think is fascinating is the age division in the outcome of the vote. The over 35s basically voted for another grand coalition. And yes, the over 35s are also a pretty large numerical majority in an aging Germany. But the under 35s all voted either Green or Liberal. And in fact, more of them voted for the Liberals than for the Greens, which is super interesting because the Greens had cast themselves really as the only party capable of taking Germany not just into a carbon neutral future, but of addressing all the reform issues, digitalization, again, carbon neutrality, education reform, and so on, and a more, a sharper foreign policy with regard to authoritarian great powers interfering in Europe, like Russia and China. And the Liberals had been presenting themselves as the counterpoint to that. Remember that the Liberals have in recent times been so weak that they were bounced out of parliament in 2000, was it in 2009? Yes, it was, where they, because they didn't make it across the 5% threshold for entry. And the Liberals now are in the position suddenly of being the kingmaker, and not just at 11.5%, but also of being a significant check on the Greens' assumed primacy among the young or youngish.
Wow. What else? I mean, regional differences in the voting that stand out?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And that's the, if you will, the nasty surprise. The Alternative for Germany, the hard right party, AfD for short, that was founded in 2013 in response to the Eurozone crisis as a Eurosceptic party, and which morphed into something completely different, a very radical, very ideological, xenophobic party after the migration crisis of 2015. Remember, that came in for the first time into the Bundestag in 2017 with 12.6% of the vote, making it the leader of the opposition because there was a grand coalition in power. And, leader opposition chairs the budget committee. That, in other words, gives it significant power. And they only got 10.3, definitely below their expectations, but there is a geographical division. In fact, one newspaper article this week titled a piece about this development, the Lega Ost, the Lega Nord is the party of Matteo Salvini, the right-wing radicals in Italy, now just calling themselves, they came up in the industrialized north of Italy, now just call themselves the Lega. And the reason why this article chose to call them that was that they came in first place in Saxony and Thuringia with about 25%, which is, shocking, particularly given their overt affinity with neo-Nazi street movements, identitarian street movements, and so on. I mean, for me, that as a German is just shocking. There are explanations for that. And I do want to remind you that on the national average, still nearly 90% of Germans do not vote the AfD. And all the parties, particularly the Conservatives, have a strict non-cooperation policy with it. So their policy of sort of working their way into representative politics and forcing others to work with them has not worked on the national level. But on the regional level in Saxony and Thuringia, it's going to be hard to see how the democratic parties, and I say democratic deliberately because this is a party that seeks the overthrow of significant aspects of Germany's representative constitutional order, the democratic parties would have to form not just three-way coalitions, but perhaps even four-way coalitions to prevent the entry of the front runner into government. And that's going to be very interesting in the next regional elections. Reason for their success, I think, is really the failure of the establishment parties over decades to respond to the resentments and the feeling of being left behind of many voters in Eastern Germany. Does
it surprise you that 30 years on,
yes and no.
East Germany is still so distinct from the rest of Germany?
Well, it's distressing. I mean, I'm a West German diplomat kid, but I grew up mostly outside of Germany. And in fact, I experienced the fall of the wall while a graduate student at Harvard, which to me was a truly momentous occasion, not least because I had been part of a West German coalition, a West German generation that sort of no longer really cared. Mm-hmm. And then was just taken completely by surprise and fascinated by what evolved in Germany. And I mean, it seems to me that something has gone very badly wrong in public policy if those divisions are as stark as they are. And I do have an explanation for that. It's interesting that there's an annual report by the Commissioner for Unification, as he's called, the Bundesbeauftragte für Wiedervereinigung, who sort of looks at social, economic, and political conditions and compares them. And it really is notable that the areas where the AfD gets the most traction politically correlate most clearly with genuine, deeply entrenched structural deficits in public infrastructure, transportation. These are often very rural areas that literally find themselves cut off from political and technical transformation. That strikes me as a genuine and really deplorable public policy omission on the part of the established party leaderships that really ruled these states for decades, like fiefdoms. I hate to say this, but it's. Well, let me preface this with saying something else. I do think that given the overt radicalization of the AfD and the fact that its hard right wing, the Flügel, has essentially won the competition for power within the AfD, I think folks have less of an excuse for voting for the AfD than they used to. Yeah. And polls do say that people are now voting out of conviction rather than out of protest, which was very much the case in the early days. So I do disapprove of it, and I do think, I sort of wonder what people are thinking. I would like to know more. But it's also notable that the very popular Social Democrat minister president of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern in the north, that's the northern Baltic state that lives mainly off tourism and post-operative care clinics, sanatoriums on the seaside, who is not a Western import like many of the leading politicians in the East, but is homegrown, and like Olaf Scholz, sort of was very careful to use the language of respect in her public self-presentation. Respect was the, if you will, claim, as the PR folks say, of the Social Democratic campaign. And I think Manuela Schwesig, which is her name, was doing this before the National Party claimed this as its logo, as its slogan. And I think that there's something to learn from that, frankly. And I think we do need a national debate about what West German politicians got wrong over 30 years. I've written about this if anybody cares to read it. I think you may have read my anniversary piece of German lessons of 2 years back. But it's that is the unpleasant surprise, to finish answering your question, in this election outcome.
So let me go back to the election and then we'll go on to negotiations. What were the issues? I mean, besides continuity or non-continuity? Germany admitted a huge number of refugees in 2015. Was that an issue? Was COVID an issue? Mask mandates an issue? Looking at it obviously through American eyes.
Right. Interestingly, the migration issue, which sort of brought the AfD, to morph and into power, has practically disappeared. And even the Afghan evacuation and the Germany taking in a not insignificant number of Afghans who had been evacuated did not help the AfD gain any last-minute traction in this election campaign. And the reason for that is that, while yes, we have had a couple of instances of sort of low-level sort of domestic terrorist or crime attacks by people who came in that 2015-2016 wave, mostly, as reports have shown, and there are some good and very sort of comprehensive ones that have come out recently, among others by the Maltesers, have shown that the large majority of those immigrants have been quite successfully integrated into the German workforce, which, given Germany's demographic, actually needs immigration.
Sure.
Germany, for the longest time, had denied that. So it's become a much less salient issue in the campaign and in German politics generally. And the AfD has also just generally had a bad pandemic. It tried to evoke sort of the pandemic's challenges to civil rights and liberties as a campaign topic, wrapping itself into the mantle of the only real defender of democracy. That didn't really work. It even allied itself quite notably with German conspiracy theorist movements. And that didn't give it any traction either. The conspiracy theorists are, also tried hard, but they don't really have an established political channel through which to work. And so that, immigration and the pandemic weren't really the issues. In fact, people who sort of watched the election campaign could have been forgiven for saying, given what's on our plates, this was a remarkably shallow, introverted, and petty election campaign season, where people were, or social media in particular, got excited. Incidents went viral, like Annalena Baerbock, the Green candidate, mildly padding her CV, that kind of thing. But the large issue at stake, really, and which is the one that gave the Greens and the Liberals the traction that they got, was the question of unfinished business left behind by 16 years of Merkel's government. I mean, I think you can say fairly, perhaps one last sentence to tie this up, that Merkel was a superb crisis manager and really held Europe together, and perhaps even the alliance together in some ways, during a series of remarkable crises between 2005 and this year, but found it much more difficult to move German politics and German policy in the direction of innovation and dealing with the significant aspects in which Germany is behind the curve on innovation and necessary sort of transformations that are necessary to keep the German polity, as it were, running and performing effectively and legitimately in the years to come and in the crises to come.
It seems odd looking from outside that, I mean, with her huge personal popularity, that none of that seemed to rub off on her party. And that they even lost her constituency to the Social Democrats.
Yeah. Well, again, her consistency was in that Baltic Sea state, northern state that I mentioned earlier, where the Social Democrats really sort of swept through. So that was perhaps less of a surprise. But I think what you saw in this election campaign was that, and that often happens after long periods in government, is that the party had not, well, I'm trying to find a polite way of saying this, because I mean, I'm not a party member, but I do find what the CDU is doing currently quite distressing, and it would be funny if it weren't so tragic. What I mean to say is that one gets the distinct impression that every single of the men who felt slighted between 2005 and this year by Merkel's continued remarkably successful grip on power, and who felt that he would have done a better job in 2005 or any of the years intervening since then, are now at each other's throats. And what this is ending up as, regrettably, is a circular firing squad. Remember that the gap between the Social Democrats and the CDU isn't that large. And we had that in 2005 as well, where Merkel lost a 20 percentage point lead because the SPD surged at the last minute. And Gerhard Schröder, the incumbent, said to her, you haven't got a snowball's chance in hell, or words to that effect, of forming a coalition against me. Go. Sorry, that was a, ape thumping, chest thumping movement. And that's pretty much what he did on publicly funded live TV on the night of the election. And that didn't help his position. And so what you have now is a spread of 1.6 percentage points between the CDU and the SPD. So it's not completely inconceivable that Armin Laschet, second in place, would say, I'm going to try and negotiate with the Greens and the Liberals as well for a so-called Jamaica coalition, because the colors of the Jamaican flag, black, green, and yellow, are also the colors of those parties. And I think that is attractive to the Greens and the Liberals, who for the first time in history are in the position of talking to each other first before they talk to the main parties. And it's attractive for two reasons. One, because of course it helps them play out the two main parties against each other. And secondly, because both the Greens were preparing mentally for years for a coalition with the CDU, and the Liberals have much more issue overlap with the Conservatives than they do with the Social Democrats. And finally, and worst, Christian Lindner, the head of the Liberals, wants to be finance minister. He would have a chancellor who is currently finance minister. And every time Lindner, and who disagrees with him violently on policy stuff, and every time Lindner as finance minister would do things, he would have a chancellor who has all his peers' phone numbers on speed dial on his cell phone and could text them and say, ignore my finance minister, I make the decisions here in the Chancellery. So there's actually, real leverage here for this. But if the CDU continues to implode as it's doing currently, with rumors about Laschet having to step back because he didn't win a parliamentary mandate, the Bavarian minister president challenging his right to undertake coalition negotiations, everybody's sniping from backstage, that may fall apart. Hard to say at this point.
So is it a signal today when Chancellor Merkel sent a message of congratulations to Olaf Scholz, the leader of the Social Democratic Party? Is that a signal that they should take the lead in negotiating the coalition?
I'm tempted to quote a very famous British TV series that was, of course, remade as The American House of Cards and say, you may think so, Matty, but I couldn't possibly comment. But let me put it this way, Merkel rarely does anything that is, unreflected.
Okay, that's the perfect answer. That's the perfect answer. So now here's the question. Obviously in the US, we don't have experienced negotiating coalition governments, and we don't have a parliamentary form of government, but one knows how many seats each party has. You know the positions of each party. Each issued their manifesto and they campaigned on that manifesto. How long will it, I mean, it seems like as much a problem of mathematics as one of politics. How long should it take to work out a deal, whether it's a government led by a traffic light government, traffic light coalition which I think is a terrific name for it, led by the Social Democrats, or a Jamaican, also love that, government led by the Christian Democrats.
Well, if we were just talking about numbers, there would be two other attractive options. The Deutschland coalition, which is black, red, and yellow. So the Social Democrats, a grand coalition plus the Liberals.
Right. They would keep the Greens out of.
Yes, and then there's the Kenya coalition, which would be the other option. So, so a grand coalition plus the Greens. Those are out. But what some people appear to be seriously pondering is another grand coalition, but flipped, with the Social Democrats providing the Chancellor and the CDU in the minority. I have a hard time seeing the CDU swallowing that, but it is being mulled by some commentators. Now, on the timing, I still think we're heading towards a traffic light, and as you know, Germans take traffic lights very seriously, unlike some cultures. And although it will be difficult to negotiate because there are significant policy differences, and the party programs, I have to say, are not explicit enough, I think, on some of the issues that would have to be really hammered out in coalition negotiations. But let me sort of outline what I think the hard stops ought to be. And people are joking about Merkel who would be the head of the caretaker government. They're definitely remaining the longest serving chancellor in German history, at least in post-war history. People are joking.
She's still in the Bundestag.
She's not in the Bundestag. Well, she lost her mandate. So once the Bundestag is constituted, but as long as we don't have the new government isn't sworn in, and it will only be sworn.
Then she stays as that.
She remains in power as the caretaker chancellor, and of course, Scholz remains the finance minister, which is delightful. And so, Scholz will be negotiating from a position of being in power, which is why he is, I think, justifiably relaxed about all this and about the Greens and the Liberals talking together. But so the joke is, will she have to give the New Year's address again? If the president does Christmas, she does, the chancellor does New Year's. But frankly, the more important dates are Germany takes on the chair of the presidency of the G7 in January, while the French take on the EU presidency. Berlin and Paris tend to coordinate those very closely. And then there are the French presidential elections in the spring, where, Macron will be running against two hard right candidates. And finally, the US midterms, which are also not exactly irrelevant for German foreign and security policy. So you would think that a new government would want to be in place in order to take on the G7, and particularly a chancellor who is the current finance minister would want to be chancellor by that time.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that they would put some steam under it. But I'm not a part of this, so who knows? I'm willing to be surprised.
Let me urge everybody that we're getting to the questions from the audience part, so please send in your questions. We've got a few. But before we go to that, while people are composing their questions, this may be a question that makes more sense in the US than in Germany, but how have the markets responded to this election? Is the stock market up? Is the stock market down? Are business
the markets are just
postpone investment, or it makes
look, if it had been chaos, if somebody had dropped dead, or if the AfD had come out first, I think you would have seen the market responding. But in this way, with everybody bunching together in the middle, and with, relatively serious people on all sides. And, particularly given the alternatives you see elsewhere, I think the markets are just fine with this.
Okay, well, that is encouraging. We've got some questions here, and they're coming in. So first question, and I think it's pretty interesting and hard to give a short answer. I'm going to ask for a short answer. Can you talk about who are the social democrats? I mean, their color is red. The U.S. is scared of socialists. These guys are clearly, they're part of the Socialist International. But we're not talking Venezuela here. I mean, who are social democrats?
So look, I think the American idea of socialism is somewhat divorced from political reality in Europe. Yeah. The American idea of socialism is most accurately reflected by Die Linke, the hard left party, which didn't get enough votes in theory to make it across the 5% threshold, but because it got 3 direct mandates, will be represented by 39 legislators. And even there you have pragmatists, who are running a government in Thuringia. So the Social Democrats, let's not forget, have fielded 3 chancellors who were internationally respected. The third perhaps has seen his reputation gone somewhat downhill after joining the board of Gazprom once he left office. But even Gerhard Schröder, the most recent one, is responsible for Germany's soaring prosperity by liberalizing labor markets in the early 2000s. And the other 2 I'm referring to were Willy Brandt and Helmut Schmidt. And both not undisputed, particularly in America, but both, I think, with claims to greatness for reasons I won't go into here. But historically, the Social Democrats have been divided in 2 camps. One, a sort of somewhat more introverted nationalist, sort of quite left-wing camp. And then they, in the 1950s, had a party conference at Bad Godesberg, a suburb of Bonn, the then capital of West Germany, and decided that they needed to become, votable, electable, that they needed to anchor themselves firmly in the West, in NATO, in the then developing European unions, not yet called that, and with a firm commitment to representative democracy. And it's that the left wing has always existed in the Social Democrat camp, but it's never been it's never questioned. It's questioned NATO policies. It has questioned in the past the Germany's need to remain in NATO, but it has never questioned Germany's stance as a representative democracy or a sort of paid up member of the United Nations and the European Union. And even today, I think the members of the left wing, wouldn't question Germany's NATO membership anymore. So that's where, and Scholz belongs firmly to the right wing of the Social Democrats, and I would say has, while he's not without sort of a couple of sort of difficult patches in his CV, the one claim to the history books that he already has is basically forcing his coalition partner Angela Merkel to accept a European recovery program in the middle of the pandemic in last spring, in which for the first time the European Union agreed to a one-off debt issuance to fund the recovery. I think without that, it's quite likely that the European Union might have fallen apart. And I won't go into details here, but that would have also had a significant impact on European cohesion in NATO.
Well, that leads us, got 2 or 3 questions asking about.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll try to be shorter.
German foreign policy and security policy.
Mm-hmm.
As you look at the possible coalitions do you see major changes in Germany's foreign relations and Germany's relationship with NATO and
major
with the United States?
Yeah, not major, but I do see some issues ahead. And let me start with the following observation, which is that the Greens and the Liberals want what they call veto ministries. I'm not sure that I'm a constitutional lawyer by training, not sure that exists in constitutional law, but I'll leave that aside. What they want is power ministries, Americans would say. And the Liberals want finance, as I've already said, and the Greens want a super ministry for climate, the environment, and perhaps energy or economics. Notably, nobody is making a mad dash for the foreign ministry or the defense ministry.
Yeah.
That tells you something. And to be honest, I also, if I look at the available candidates for those two ministries, you know, there are some that are more qualified and some that are less obviously qualified, to put it politely. And that I think is, you know, should come as a concern for those of our neighbors and allies who want Germany because of its central geographic position in Europe and because of its prosperity and power to, you know, take on a leadership role, or at least, you know, have a foreign and security policy that recognizes the fact that many of the decisions it takes have an impact beyond its borders. Or as I say when I want to rile people in German debates, I say, well, people need to acknowledge that we are in Europe what America is in NATO, which is where the 800-pound gorilla that, you know, just only has to turn over in its sleep to make the windows shake. And that, I think, is the sort of the lack of, I mean, there are some gifted younger foreign and security policy experts, no question, who have, for example, much stronger views on China, both in the Social Democrats and in the Greens and in the Liberals. There I do see a shift coming. I also think that the positions on Russian interference have hardened pretty much across the board, except in the two extremist parties. That's not really something I'm worried about. That keeps cropping up in American debates. I think that is where things are going to be notably stable or shifting towards a sharper position. What I worry about with the Social Democrats and the Greens is defense spending and nuclear participation and the defense platforms necessary for nuclear participation, namely the Tornado fighter jets that can be equipped with nuclear warheads. And there, I think the Social Democrats and the Greens have been either the Greens don't like the 2%. The 2% target and say, you know, it's abstract. It doesn't consider the complexity of the issues. Yeah, but you know what? We still signed off on it. I mean, everybody knows that it's just a marker, right? And to keep saying that is sort of unhelpful. And the Social Democrats they have a strong left wing in foreign and security politics that has sort of pacifist views on nuclear weapons and disarmament that those are expressed in the party program that I think are a throwback to the 80s and that I personally am concerned about. That said, 1998, Gerhard Schröder and Joschka Fischer famously came into power and had to sign off on the NATO air war against Serbia over Kosovo. It's the Serbian regime's depredations in Kosovo before even taking the oath of office. So sometimes, you know, events, dear boy, events will sort of conspire to push folks into making decisions or updating their thinking on issues that they would have much preferred not to have to be tested on. Debbie, sorry, that was the long answer again.
No, it's a great answer. Debbie Neese asked, do you think Middle East policy will remain the same, particularly the relationship with Israel?
Yeah, I think that's unquestioned. I mean, honestly, the only thing that makes the German commitment to Israel is I think, you know, part of the foundational sort of self-definition of German foreign policy. And I think that's correct across the parties. Honestly, the only thing that makes that difficult is the occasional Israeli government leader who sort of won't quit when the voters tell him to quit, and who exhibits otherwise perhaps slightly problematic behavior. But even in that case, these matters are discussed behind closed doors, and the Israelis still get German subs.
Christian,
let me just add one point.
Oh,
here.
sure.
I mean, Germany has a growing and sort of vital and sort of very publicly involved Jewish community as well. That is also much more diverse than it used to be back in West Germany, and so that too means that this isn't abstract for us. We have Jewish fellow citizens and who may or may not have a sort of vital interest in Israeli politics. Some do, some don't, but that is a sort of living bridge, of a size and diversity that wasn't there until maybe 2 decades ago. Not in this way.
That's a great point. Christian York asks, what is the economic engine for the German economy over the next 5 years? I mean, I'm seeing that automation is going to lead to huge layoffs in the automobile industry. What replaces that?
Well, yeah, well, there you go. That's one of the reform issues that the next government has to urgently tackle. Is the way I put it is that the enormous growth of exports in the German manufacturing sector, and particularly car manufacturing sector, has really allowed German manufacturers and car makers in particular to sort of avoid for far too long the transformative issues in their sectors. Artificial intelligence, the sharing economy, the transition to electrically powered cars, and so on. Add to that the current global supply chain issues, and you have the makings of a really vexingly complex and sticky transformational problem ahead of us. And particularly given the fact also that the Chinese increasingly are, evincing the ambition to replace their import suppliers with nationally manufactured goods, and are increasingly capable of doing that. So yeah, I'm afraid, if I had an answer for you now, I might be a chancellor candidate myself. I think that is one of the biggest national domestic transition issues besides carbon neutrality that we have to face.
Anna Petrova asks, how are women and minorities represented in the new parliament?
Well, that's also one of the new things that I wanted to highlight, and thank you very much for asking that, because I omitted to mention it. This parliament is going to be super interesting because it's 1/3 newbies, many of whom are under 40, which by German standards, is barely time for you to get out of high school. And
I agree with that.
And so the other thing is there are I think a record number of women and non-white people of color, and there are even 2 transgender representatives, which also has to be a new one. And I think that I'm particularly pleased by the sort of the age, diversity, gender intersection, because I think to me that's a breath of fresh air. I grew into reporting about foreign and security policy at a time when German politics was heavily dominated by old male bull elephants, who did a great deal of stomping and flapping their ears and trumpeting. And I sort of welcome, the fresh air.
It's interesting. And to go from a female chancellor to, only the next chancellor will be male, no?
Yeah, I will say though that the female candidate, Annalena Baerbock, who I have a lot of respect for, because I think that she is intelligent, really hardworking, very knowledgeable, wasn't quite ready for prime time. I do think that she pushed herself, or was pushed into this position slightly too early. By German political cultural standards, she had to have either, the job of minister president, which is the equivalent of governor in the US, or an executive office, a cabinet level office for a while, to give her not just the gravitas, but the actual sort of governance experience necessary to be credible as a chancellor candidate. And I think that, this may have been aiming too far too soon. And I hope that her career isn't burned. She's being sidelined slightly right now by her co-partner, Robert Habeck, who is becoming more visible. And I really hope that she gets the chance to prove herself in a cabinet job, because I think that she has the chops to be a serious contender in future elections.
My colleague Rajiv Dhawan asks for more detail on Germany's future relationship with China. How do you see that changing in 2022? Will Germany overtly join the US agenda of China containment? The policy thus far has been, we will trade with them and bring them along and integrate China into international organizations, and that will modify Chinese behavior. And clearly that not worked.
Let me sort of add a footnote to that description. I think that has been Merkel's policy and her chancellery's policy, but increasingly in the last 5 years, that has been criticized, not just by the Greens, who were the first to do this, but by the Liberals, the Social Democrats, interestingly, and by foreign and security policy experts in her own party, and most recently the German Federation of Trade and Industry, the BDI. So there is a broad across the board consensus that this needs to change. It needs to change in terms of politics. There is, of course, a degree of interdependence of the German economy with the Chinese economy that is not something you can just sort of unpeel yourself from. And by the way, I would say that that is true for the American economy as well. Although not because we are a heavily export-oriented economy, we are more dependent than America. It doesn't mean that America is immune to this. And so the challenge for us is to sort of mitigate the complications and the vulnerabilities created by interdependence by using the leverage that interdependence gives both sides. I mean, right now we keep talking, a lot of the defenders of the old method are saying, but we don't have the leverage. That's not true.
We had a speaker last week who pointed out that U.S. trade, bilateral trade with China is $2 billion a day. A day.
Exactly.
Our economies are interdependent, and this is not the Soviet Union with whom we
absolutely
did not trade at all.
Absolutely. Right, and this is the problem of the sort of the Washington China hawks, and particularly under the Trump administration, the China hawks who said, well, we'll just uncouple and then we'll be fine. Uncoupling is unrealistic, even for America. Although, but it must be said, you have the larger domestic market.
Right. And
you have more domestic manufacturing options, although the prices for that would be significantly higher than you'd have now. But a sort of greater measure of autarky is feasible for America, whereas for Germany, that's much less feasible, and it's only achievable in the European single market trading context, which is, you guessed it, the reason why the Chinese have worked so hard to make inroads in the more vulnerable Eastern, Southeastern, and Eastern European political economies to achieve not just an economic, but also a political foothold there. In other words, European cohesion is absolutely crucial for Germany's efforts to mitigate interdependence with China.
Wow, that's great. One last question. I mean, I've got loads of questions that are essentially inside baseball.
I'm here, not going anywhere.
Deep within a party, what happens if this, that, and the other, and I apologize, I'm not going to ask those. I'm going to send them all to you by email and,
Sure.
But as the US shifts its geostrategic focus away from Europe and to the Indo-Pacific, does that concern Germany? Or on the other hand, it makes Germany more important within Europe and NATO?
That's a very interesting way of putting it. And I would say that both those things are true. So let me start with maybe a startling thesis. Is the Biden administration paid, I think, a remarkably high price for the bilateral agreement on not sanctioning Nord Stream 2, which the Biden administration signed off on with Merkel in July, and which has not just Democratic legislators and senators, but the Republicans in a tizzy, and led Senator Cruz to maintain a blanket hold on nominations of Biden administration senior political appointees, particularly those who are supposed to be working on Europe. I mean, this administration has fewer appointees in place than any other post-war administration before it. So I would say that's a pretty damn high price to pay. And what I've been arguing in Germany is to see that not as a prize for how lovely we are, but as a down payment for future expectations of Germany. Mm-hmm. In which case, I think you have to actually, have a particularly vivid imagination to imagine what those are. And I think two things are important here. I will say that I think the Biden administration's European policy and how it slots in with the sort of reorientation towards the competition with China strikes me as somewhat less than thought out. And I think we saw that in the Afghan withdrawal and in the kerfuffle over the submarine deal. But I think it seems clear that there's two elements to this. And one is that Europeans, while Americans, or at least democratic American government, will not question America's commitment to Article 5 and the defense of the alliance territory in the case of the conflict, that commitment will be tempered by a tendency to say to Europeans, listen, if it's small and medium-sized conflicts on your periphery, you're really going to have to be able to do these on your own, and we're advising you now to get ready for this. Yeah. So we're not going to redo a Libya where we provide all the enabling platforms so that you can even show up at the party. And the other aspect that I think is even less thought out, and where Europe actually has leverage with Washington, is the fact that so much of, as we were just discussing, so much of this competition with China is, not necessarily military, but is about competition in trade and regulatory spaces and international institutions, where the Europeans not just have significant power assets to bring to the table, but in fact, I would say that gives them leverage to occasionally say to the Biden administration, we would really rather not you did it this way, and here is why. And honestly, on your decision depends whether we're willing to play along with this. And you will find yourself significantly less taken less seriously on these points in Beijing if you don't have us behind you or besides you. I do think that that's a real thing. And I think that fundamentally, Biden administration folks know this, but, American military power is incontrovertible, which is, why it's sort of nice to talk about it. But in conflicts marked by deep interdependence, it's increasingly less relevant. And if you have sort of military escalations that sort of, then sort of run off the guardrails, then more is damaged than, maybe the bows of a couple of frigates, because it will, and again, the current sort of massive supply chain disruptions that we're seeing, I think are a sort of premonition of what could happen if a sort of a military competition that escalates by mistake or turns kinetic, because that would have significant economic and financial markets impact in ways that I think people are not factoring into their calculations.
Let me just translate that. Kinetic means shooting war.
Sorry, yes.
Yes. Great.
Sorry, I've been here too long, clearly.
Constanze, I want to thank you so much. This has just been tremendous, and there's a lot for all of us to think about and consider as Germany moves forward, and as the U.S. relationship with Germany develops, a relationship with the government that emerges from these negotiations that are going on. With caretaker government followed by a new government, and who gives the New Year's greetings to the nation, I think is going to have huge impact, not just in Germany, but obviously in Europe and clearly in the transatlantic relationship. So I thank you so much for shedding light on this, for giving us some meaty issues to chew on and to think about as we plan our programming in the future. This has just been great, and I hope you are going to come to Atlanta. I'm going to give you an invitation now for you. You tell me in the spring.
Accepted.
Good.
I'd be thrilled.
Want you to come in. That's going to be great. And I want to thank the audience. This has been really tremendous. Thank you all. We're going to post the video of this program today on YouTube this afternoon. Everybody, please share it with your friends. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and you'll get notification when things go up. I urge all of you to join and support your local World Affairs Council, those of you in the US. If you don't have one near you, we've got a digital membership for people who don't live in Georgia but want to be part of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta. We've got an in-person programming. It'll be our first since March of 2020 on October 18th with Jorge Arguello, who's the ambassador of Argentina to the United States. The title of the program is Argentina, Business, Politics, and Wine. And I want to underline the wine part. That's why we're doing this in person. We're going to have some fine Argentine wine. So go on our website and please join us at 6 p.m. October 18th. I want to thank Agnieszka Block at Brookings, who helped us do a lot of the coordination for this. Valerie Lopez de Frank, the producer of all of our shows. Anna Petrova, our social media and marketing manager. Henna Rennie, the executive producer. And above all, Constanze Stelzenmüller, I want to thank you. This is great. One last question. If people want to read more, one of the questions that came in says, where can we find out more? Where is there a good analysis of the relationship between the former East Germany and the former West Germany and the integration of East Germany into the larger Germany? Where do you suggest we get information on that?
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you first for this lovely talk. Very informed with great questions. And I also want to say to everybody on the talk, support your World Affairs Councils everywhere. They're wonderful. I think this is one of the great civil society groupings of America that, when sometimes, Germans who have, I don't know, mixed feelings about America say to me, but America's so introverted. And I'm like, no. If you've never been to a World Affairs Council meeting, and you can go to them across the country, as I have tried to do. I have a bucket list, and I've made it to Alaska, which is my great pride. Still got Hawaii on it though. And they're fabulous. So really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you not just for inviting me, but for being who you are and what you are. And in terms of reading, actually, one of the interesting things is how much English language media have developed interest in Germany's politics. So The Economist, the Financial Times, but also the New York Times, the Washington Post have all had fantastic reporting about the German elections and beyond. Politico has a whole hub dedicated to it. And then there are lots of Germans who now write in English for these and other publications. And finally, you can read my stuff if you want. If you go on the Brookings webpage and go to my expert tab, you will find everything I've ever written in the last 8 years, my time at Brookings. And specifically to the question about East and West Germany, the essay that I was talking about from 2019 is called German Lessons. And if you Google Brookings and German lessons, you'll find that. And I think that might help answer some of your questions about the East-West relationship. Also,
Okay.
I have a monthly column in the Financial Times for anybody who really wants to, is a glutton for punishment.
That's great. We will send the link to your tab on the Brookings website to everybody who
Awesome.
registered today,
Cool.
along with the video, the YouTube video of this, so that you can watch it again. This is great.
Great.
Constanze,
Right.
thank you so much for joining us today. I've enjoyed this thoroughly.
Thank
Good
you.
afternoon, everybody. Bye-bye.
And much love to Atlanta.
Thank
You go.
you.